The desert shook under the sound of distant explosions. Smoke rose into the pale sky, and the sand carried the scent of burning metal. Daniel staggered forward, his breath heavy, his clothes torn, and his body bruised from the battle that had erupted only hours before. He was not a soldier anymore, not in the true sense. He had walked away from wars long ago, but fate had dragged him back to this wasteland. Now survival was his only mission, though the war around him seemed endless. He had been separated from his group after the enemy attack scattered them across the dunes. Alone, with no weapon except a dull combat knife, Daniel wandered the ruins of an old battlefield. The ground was littered with half-buried machines, skeletons of ships that had fallen from the sky, and strange wreckage from armies that had clashed here long before his time. He felt the weight of history pressing down on him, a graveyard of forgotten warriors who had fought and died on this cursed land. His boots sank into the sand as he climbed over a broken ridge. That was when he noticed the pit. At first it looked like nothing more than a hollow where the ground had caved in, but something caught the sunlight at the bottom, something that shimmered like fire beneath the dirt. Curiosity pulled him closer. He slid down the edge, ignoring the sharp pain in his leg. The glow grew brighter as he brushed away layers of dust. His hand touched metal and he froze. It was a sword, not a broken piece of scrap, not rusted iron like the relics scattered across the desert, but a blade that pulsed with a golden light as if alive. The hilt was heavy, carved with symbols he did not recognize, alien markings that seemed to shift under his gaze. He wrapped his fingers around it, and the sand seemed to tremble beneath him. The blade slid free from the earth with surprising ease, as though it had been waiting for him. As the sword came into full view, Daniel's breath caught. Words glowed across the steel, burning like fire etched by unseen hands. He read them slowly, his voice breaking in the silence. All enemies of the fallen warrior are now your enemies. The moment he spoke the words, the ground shook violently. A wave of energy rushed out from the blade, spreading across the desert like a storm. Dust lifted, bones rattled, and far in the distance the echoes of war seemed to grow louder. Daniel stumbled back, his heart racing. The sword hummed in his grip, alive, aware, almost demanding his attention. He felt a strange heat spread through his arm, not painful but powerful, like strength flowing into his blood. He looked around, expecting someone to be watching, but there was no one. Only the endless desert and the silence after the quake. Still, he could not shake the feeling that he was no longer alone. Far away, beyond the broken ridges, a group of alien soldiers turned their heads toward the disturbance. Their leader hissed in their guttural tongue, pointing toward the horizon. They had felt it too, the awakening of the blade. It was no ordinary weapon, and they knew the prophecy tied to it. The one who drew the sword would inherit the enemies of the fallen warrior, and those enemies were many. Daniel tightened his grip. He had not asked for this. He had not asked to become part of a legend written in fire and blood. Yet the sword had chosen him, and the war had already found him. In the distance, the roar of engines and the flash of alien weapons lit up the sky. The battle was coming closer, and he now held the one weapon that could decide it. Daniel stood in the pit with the sword in his hands, its golden glow reflecting in his eyes. The desert around him had gone strangely silent, as though the world itself was holding its breath. He could feel the weight of the blade, but it was more than just steel. It carried history, power, and something ancient that reached inside his chest and refused to let go. He whispered to himself, asking what he had done, but the desert gave no answer. Then he heard the sound. Engines. Harsh, metallic, and angry. He climbed out of the pit and looked across the dunes. A line of alien vehicles moved like predators over the sand, their black hulls covered with spikes, banners, and glowing blue markings. Soldiers rode them, armored in scales and bone, their weapons alive with crackling energy. They were not searching anymore. They were hunting. Daniel crouched low, clutching the sword, his mind racing. He was only one man. He had no army, no backup, no plan. But the blade pulsed as if it knew the danger. His heart beat faster in rhythm with it. and he felt the strange warmth again, flowing into his veins. He lifted the sword, and the glow spread, brighter, forcing the aliens to slow their advance. They had seen it. They recognized it. The lead soldier stepped forward, his tall frame covered in armor that looked grown rather than built. His helmet was shaped like a skull with burning eyes, and when he raised his clawed hand, the army behind him stopped. His voice cut through the desert like a blade. He shouted words in his language, but Daniel could not understand. Still, the meaning was clear. The sword had marked him, and they would not let him live. Daniel gritted his teeth. He had no choice. He raised the sword higher, its golden fire cutting through the dust. For a moment, silence again. Then the aliens charged. The first wave came, fast, engines roaring and sand spraying as their vehicles raced toward him. Daniel's body moved before his mind could catch up. He swung the sword, and light burst from the blade in a wide arc. The ground cracked open and the nearest vehicles exploded in fire and smoke. Aliens screamed as they were thrown into the air, their weapons falling useless. Daniel staggered at the force, his arms trembling, but the sword guided him like it knew exactly what to do. Another soldier leaped toward him, claws flashing. Daniel ducked, then thrust the blade forward. It cut through armor like paper, and the alien fell without a sound. More came, fearless and furious. Daniel fought them one after another, every strike unleashing sparks of golden fire that lit up the battlefield. He was no longer just a man with a weapon. He was something more, something the aliens feared. But fear did not stop them. They kept coming, wave after wave, until the desert was filled with screams, smoke, and fire. Daniel's body ached. Sweat burned his eyes and his muscles felt like iron ready to break. Yet the sword refused to let him fall. It carried him, pushing him past exhaustion, whispering through its glow that he could not stop. Not now. When the last of the attackers fell, silence returned again. Daniel stood among broken machines and fallen bodies, the sword still glowing in his hand. His chest heaved with breath and his legs threatened to collapse, but he remained standing. He looked at the blade and wondered what curse he had uncovered. Far, in the distance, the alien commander who had shouted earlier stood on a ridge watching. He had not joined the fight. He only observed, and his burning eyes never left Daniel. Slowly he raised a hand, and the soldiers who still lived pulled back. The commander spoke a single word before turning away. Daniel could not understand it, but the tone chilled him. It was not defeat. It was a promise. Daniel lowered the sword and stared at the horizon. He knew this was only the beginning. Whatever war had been fought here long ago was not over. By lifting the sword, he had pulled himself into it, and the enemies of the fallen warrior were already moving against him. The desert wind carried the smell of smoke long after the battle ended. Daniel stood in silence, his hands trembling as the golden sword dimmed and rested in his grip. The bodies of alien soldiers surrounded him, their weapons broken, their machines burning in twisted heaps. He should have felt relief at surviving, but there was no relief. Only a heavy truth pressing down on him. This sword was not just a weapon, it was a call. He wiped sweat from his face and began walking, dragging his tired legs across the sand. The sun was high, burning his skin, but the sword remained cool in his hand. It almost seemed alive, humming softly as if whispering to him. He tried to push the thought away. He had no use for legends or prophecies. He wanted to survive, to escape this endless war. But deep inside he already knew there was no escaping it anymore. The desert stretched on until the horizon blurred, and in that emptiness Daniel saw movement. Not soldiers this time, but shadows rising from beneath the sand. They took form as he drew closer. Ruins, towers broken in half, statues cracked and buried, walls covered with alien carvings. A forgotten city lay before him, half swallowed by the desert. He entered carefully, his senses sharp. The air here was different, heavier, filled with whispers of something old. He passed broken arches and collapsed halls, and each step made the sword glow brighter. The carvings on the walls flickered with faint light when the blade came near. Strange figures were drawn there, warriors with swords, kings with crowns, beasts with burning eyes. And in the center of it all was the Yao, same blade he carried now. Daniel stopped and stared. The carving showed a man holding the sword as armies bowed before him. But in the next carving, the same man was surrounded by countless enemies, his allies gone, his figure alone. At the final wall, the warrior had fallen, his body covered in shadows, and the sword buried in the ground. Underneath, strange alien, words glowed, words Daniel could not read. The blade pulsed again, and suddenly the translation filled his mind. The one who raises the sword shall inherit all the enemies of the fallen. His chest grew tight. The sword had not only given him strength, it had given him enemies he never asked for. Every rival of the warrior who once held this blade was now hunting him. Armies, empires, creatures he had never even seen. They were now his burden. The sound of footsteps pulled him back. Daniel spun, sword raised. From the shadows of the ruins emerged a figure, tall and thin, cloaked in dark cloth that fluttered in the wind. The face was hidden, but the eyes glowed faint blue. Not like the alien soldiers he had fought. This one moved with grace, not violence. "You should not have touched it," the figure said in a voice that echoed strangely, as though more than one spoke at once. Daniel held his ground. "I didn't have much choice. It was either pick it up or die empty-handed." The figure tilted its head. "And now you will die with it. The sword does not choose without reason. You are bound to its fate." Daniel stepped closer, his voice sharp. "Then tell me what that fate is. What am I fighting?" The figure's eyes flared brighter. "All that the fallen warrior could not destroy. Beasts buried beneath stars. Empires that never forgot their hatred. Armies that will cross galaxies to kill you. You are now the center of their war." The words hit him like a hammer. He wanted to laugh, to call it madness, but the images on the walls had already shown him the truth. He was trapped. "Then help me," Daniel said. His grip tightened on the sword. "If I'm already in this war, I'm not dying alone." The figure was silent for a long moment. Then it raised its hand, and a faint glow formed. "I cannot fight for you, but I can guide you to those who will. If you wish to live, follow me." Daniel hesitated only a moment before nodding. The desert had given him the sword, but maybe these ruins would give him allies. The cloaked figure moved through the ruins with slow, steady steps, and Daniel followed, sword in hand. The air felt colder inside the broken city, even though the desert sun still blazed above. His boots scraped against stone floors that had not been touched in centuries. Every corner seemed to hold secrets, and the carvings on the walls glowed faintly each time the sword passed near. Daniel wanted to ask 100 questions, but the figure's silence forced him to wait. At last, they reached a chamber where the ceiling had collapsed, leaving beams of sunlight falling like golden pillars across the dust. The figure stopped at the center and turned. "You are not the first to hold the blade," the voice echoed, layered and strange. "Others before you tried. They drew it from the ground, believing they could wield its power. But the sword rejects the unworthy. It consumes them." Daniel's grip tightened. "And why hasn't it consumed me?" The figure's glowing eyes studied him. "Because it saw something, perhaps strength, perhaps desperation. Or perhaps you were simply the only one left alive to claim it." Daniel scowled. That answer gave him no comfort. He was a man with scars, regrets, and nothing but survival to his name. If that was enough to wield a sword that could shape wars, then the galaxy was in worse shape than he thought. "Where are you leading me?" Daniel asked. "To those who may follow you," the figure replied. "The enemies you face are beyond one man. Even with the sword, you will need allies." Daniel almost laughed. "Allies? I couldn't even keep my own squad together. They're dead or scattered. Who else would be crazy enough to fight in a war like this?" The figure raised a hand and pointed to a doorway at the far end of the chamber. "Those who remember the old warrior, those who swore oaths when he fell, they live in hiding, waiting for the sword to return. Some will hate you, some will fear you, but some may stand with you." if you survive their judgment. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. And who are you? Why are you helping me? The figure's voice grew softer. Because the enemies of the fallen are also my enemies. If you fail, the galaxy burns. If you succeed, perhaps there is a chance for balance again. Before Daniel could answer, the sound of movement came from outside the chamber. Heavy footsteps, metal scraping stone, alien voices barking orders. The figure's head snapped toward the sound. They are already here. Daniel's chest tightened. He had barely survived the first battle. He was still weak, his body aching, yet the enemies hunted him without rest. He raised the sword and golden light filled the chamber, casting long shadows against the broken walls. The figure stepped back into the darkness. If you live through this, follow the path through the ruins. It will lead you to the survivors. Then, without another word, the figure vanished into the shadows, leaving Daniel alone. The enemy soldiers stormed into the chamber a moment later, their eyes burning with fury at the sight of the glowing sword. Daniel gritted his teeth. He could feel the hum of the blade in his hand, stronger now, almost eager. He knew he couldn't run. The sword had pulled him into this war, and there was no going back. He stood his ground as the first alien charged. The fight was brutal. Steel met claws, light clashed with shadow. Daniel's muscles screamed with every strike, but the sword gave him strength again, guiding his movements. The room shook with each blow, dust falling from the cracked ceiling. He cut down one soldier, then another, but more poured in. They attacked without fear, desperate to take the blade from him. At last, silence fell. The floor was covered with bodies, and Daniel stood alone again, his chest heaving. He leaned on the sword to stay upright. His vision blurred, but he was still alive. The chamber was quiet, but he felt the truth in his bones. If these were only scouts, then greater armies were already on their way. He had no choice but to find the ones the cloaked figure spoke of, the survivors, the oath keepers. Maybe, just maybe, they could help him survive what was coming. The ruins stretched far beyond what Daniel had first seen. Once he left the chamber of carvings behind, he found himself moving through broken corridors that twisted like a maze. The sword's glow dimmed when the air was calm, then brightened whenever danger lingered close. It was more than a weapon now. It was a compass pulling him deeper into the forgotten city. Hours passed. The sun began to sink, casting the desert in blood-red light. Daniel's body begged for rest, but he pushed forward, following the faint path the cloaked figure had promised. The carvings changed as he moved. At first, they had shown the glory of the old warrior, but now they showed fire and betrayal. Armies burning, cities collapsing, shadows swallowing light. He could almost hear screams echoing from the walls, though the city had been silent for centuries. At last he found a stairwell leading underground. The steps were cracked and half-buried, but he forced his way down. The air grew cooler, heavy, with dust and the smell of something old. The sword hummed louder, as if warning him that he was close to something important. At the bottom, a door stood. Unlike the ruins above, this one was intact, made of black stone carved with strange runes. Daniel reached for it, and the sword's glow spread across the surface. The runes lit up, one by one, until the door creaked open. He stepped inside. Chamber beyond was no ruin. It was alive. Blue flames burned in tall torches, and rows of armored figures stood along the walls. For a moment, Daniel thought they were soldiers waiting in silence. Then he realized they were statues, crafted with such detail they looked real. Each one held a weapon, and each one had the same symbol across the chest, the mark of the fallen warrior. At the far end of the hall stood a group of living figures. Their eyes turned toward him as the sword's light filled the chamber. Some rose from their seats, others reached for weapons, and the air grew tense. Daniel stopped at the center, unsure whether he had found allies or enemies. An older alien with pale skin and silver markings across his face stepped forward. His armor was worn but polished, and his voice carried authority. "The sword has awakened." His eyes narrowed on Daniel. "But why does a human hold it?" Daniel tightened his grip on the hilt. "Because I found it." because no one else was there when it called. Murmurs rippled through the group. Some looked fearful, others furious. A tall woman with sharp metallic eyes spat on the ground. The sword belongs to the bloodline of the warrior, not to an outsider. Another voice rose, calmer but heavy with suspicion. If he drew it, then he carries the burden. You know the law. The leader raised a hand for silence, his gaze fixed on Daniel. If the sword has chosen you, then you have inherited not only its power but its enemies. Do you even understand what that means, human? Daniel's voice was rough but steady. I understand more than you think. I fought them today. They won't stop coming. And if what I saw on the walls is true, then this isn't just about me. It's about all of you. They'll come for anyone tied to the sword. The chamber fell into silence. The leader studied him for a long time, then spoke. If you are to carry the sword, you must prove yourself. Power alone is not enough. The warrior fell because he stood alone. If you wish for us to stand with you, you must show that you are worthy of the oath. Daniel exhaled slowly. And how do I do that? The leader's voice was cold. By surviving the trial. At dawn you will face it. If you live, some of us may follow you. If you die, then the sword will find another hand to hold. The torches flickered as if the flames themselves listened. Daniel's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stand tall. He had already fought impossible battles. He would not break now. The night in the ruins was cold. Daniel sat alone in a stone chamber, the golden sword resting across his knees. Outside he could hear faint voices of the survivors, the ones who had demanded a trial. They did not trust him. Some hated him. Yet he could feel their fear too. The sword had awakened, and its light had drawn every enemy closer. No matter how much they despised him, they needed him as much as he needed them. Daniel ran his fingers along the blade. The words still burned faintly across it, the same vow that had cursed him. All enemies of the fallen warrior are now your enemies. He whispered the line again and shook his head. Then I guess I don't get to choose. At dawn, they came for him. The leader, the pale-skinned man with silver markings, stood at the head of the group. His voice carried like thunder across the ruined city. The trial begins. If the sword truly chose you, you will endure. If not, your bones will join the dust of this place. They led him into an arena hidden deep beneath the ruins. The ground was a wide circle of cracked stone, surrounded by broken statues and walls that had long collapsed. Torches burned along the edges, casting shadows that seemed to watch him. The survivors gathered above, their eyes fixed on him with a mix of anger, hope, and curiosity. Daniel stood at the center, the sword in his hands. The leader raised one arm. Release it. The sound that followed made Daniel's blood run cold. Iron gates groaned open, and from the darkness came a roar that shook the chamber. A creature stepped forward, massive and armored, with jagged horns curling from its head and claws that scraped sparks against the stone. Its eyes glowed red, and its breath was fire. Daniel's throat went dry. This was no simple beast. It had been bred or built for war, a remnant of battles long before his time. The crowd above whispered its name. The Devourer. The creature charged. Daniel barely raised the sword before its claws slammed into him. The impact sent him rolling across the stone, the blade clattering away. Pain shot through his ribs, but he forced himself up, diving for the sword just as the beast lunged again. Golden light flared as he swung, the blade slicing across one of its horns. The Devourer screamed, shaking the walls. The fight was chaos. The beast's claws carved trenches in the stone, each strike enough to crush a man. Daniel moved on instinct, the sword guiding his arms, the glow flashing with each desperate swing. Sparks and golden fire lit the arena as steel clashed against flesh tougher than iron. The crowd shouted above, their voices mixing into a storm. Some cried for his death, others cried for him to endure. Daniel blocked out their noise. All that mattered was survival. He ducked under another strike and drove the sword deep into the beast's side. Golden fire burst outward, tearing across its body like lightning. The Devourer staggered but did not fall. It roared and smashed him with its tail, sending him crashing into a broken pillar. His vision blurred, blood filled his mouth, but still he rose. The sword pulsed harder now, as if alive with fury. Daniel gripped it tight and let the energy flow through him. He ran forward, every muscle screaming, and leapt onto the beast's back. With both hands he drove the blade down between its armored plates. The sword exploded with golden fire, a shockwave that rocked the entire arena. The beast let out one final, earth-shaking roar before collapsing into the stone, its body smoking, and still. Silence followed. Daniel stood over the fallen creature, chest heaving, the sword glowing bright in his hands. He could barely breathe, barely stand, but he had won. The survivors above stared in stunned silence. Then slowly, one by one, they began to lower their heads. Not all, not yet, but enough. The leader's voice finally broke the silence. The sword has tested him, and he did not break. Daniel leaned on the sword, his body shaking. He had survived the trial, but deep inside he knew the devourer was nothing compared to the enemies still out there. And they were already moving closer. The body of the devourer still smoked in the arena when Daniel was led back into the halls of the ruins. His muscles ached with every step, but he refused to stumble. The survivors followed in silence, their faces unreadable. Some looked at him with awe, others with bitterness. The sword glowed faintly in his hand, its fire dim after the battle, but its weight felt heavier than ever. In the great chamber, the leader stood once more before him. The silver markings across his pale face seemed brighter in the torchlight. "You endured," he said, his voice echoing off the stone. "The sword accepts you. That much is clear. But acceptance does not mean loyalty. These people will not follow you because of power alone." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then tell me what it takes." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Time, trust, and victories that prove you can turn survival into strength. The enemies of the fallen warrior will not wait. They will come in greater numbers. If you wish for these survivors to stand beside you, you must lead them in battle, the Yar." Words settled heavily on Daniel's shoulders. He was no general. He had been a soldier once, nothing more. Yet the survivors looked to him now, some with hope, others with doubt. For the first time he realized the sword had not only given him enemies, it had given him responsibility. That night, he walked among the survivors' camps hidden in the ruins. Children peeked from behind stone walls, their eyes wide. Old warriors sharpened their blades, their scars telling stories of battles long past. One young fighter, a woman with metallic eyes who had spat at him earlier, stood blocking his path. "You may have survived the trial," she said coldly, "but that does not make you our savior. Many before you held the sword for a short time. All of them fell." Daniel met her gaze. "Maybe I'll fall too. But until then, I'll fight. And if fighting keeps you alive, then hate me all you want. I don't care." For a long moment she studied him, her metallic eyes reflecting the faint glow of the sword. Then she stepped aside without a word. As the survivors settled for the night, Daniel climbed to the highest point of the ruins. The desert stretched before him under the stars, quiet for now but never safe. He gripped the sword and stared at the horizon. He could almost feel the eyes of the alien commander watching him from somewhere far away. That battle had not been an accident. It was a test from both sides. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps. The cloaked figure who had first guided him appeared once again, stepping into the moonlight. The glow in its eyes shimmered faintly. "You passed their trial," it said. "But the true trial has not yet begun. The commander who watches you is not a man of patience. He will strike soon with more than scouts. He wants the sword broken or its wielder dead." Daniel's voice was low. "Then he'll have to come for me himself." The figure tilted its head. "He will not come alone. He commands legions, creatures bred only for war. And he knows what you do not, the history of the warrior who once held that sword. The fallen left more than enemies behind. He left secrets. If you do not learn them, you will die as he did." Daniel turned toward the ruins. "Then show me where to start." The figure raised a hand, pointing toward the east, where the desert rose into jagged black mountains. Beyond those peaks lies the tomb of the warrior. There you may find answers, but beware. The enemies you inherited guard it as their own. Daniel tightened his grip on the sword. The path was clear. The sword had chosen him. The enemies hunted him, and the survivors were waiting to see if he could lead. If there were secrets in that tomb, then he would drag them into the light. Above him, the stars shimmered cold and distant, but Daniel no longer felt like a wanderer lost in the desert. He was part of something vast, something ancient, and whether he liked it or not, he was ready to face it. The survivors prepared at dawn. Weapons were sharpened, packs were filled, and armor was strapped tight. Not everyone agreed to follow, but a small group stepped forward when Daniel announced he was heading east to the tomb. They were fighters hardened by years of loss, and though doubt remained in their eyes, something about the man with the glowing sword had stirred them. The pale leader approached Daniel before he left. "Do not mistake this for loyalty," he warned. "They follow because they fear what will happen if you fail. The tomb is no place for the weak. Many who sought it never returned." Daniel nodded. "Then it's a good thing I don't plan to be weak." The group set out across the desert, the sun rising behind them like a blazing furnace. The sand shifted under their boots, and heat shimmered across the horizon. The mountains grew closer with every step, jagged black spires cutting into the sky. The survivors moved quietly, keeping watch on the dunes. Daniel led them with the sword in hand, its glow faint but steady, a reminder of the path ahead. By midday, they reached the edge of the mountains. A narrow pass twisted upward, sharp rocks jutting like blades. The air grew cooler, shadows stretching long. But before they could climb, a sound echoed through the pass. Low, guttural growls. From the rocks, above, shapes crawled into view, beasts unlike anything Daniel had ever seen, half flesh, half metal, their bodies stitched together with glowing wires and jagged plating. Their eyes burned red, and their mouths dripped with black venom. The survivors froze. "They are the Watchers," one of them whispered. "Guardians left behind by the enemies of the fallen. They kill anything that dares approach the tomb." The beasts leapt from the cliffs. Daniel barely had time to raise the sword before the first one crashed into him. Its claws scraped against the golden blade, sparks flying. He shoved it back and swung, golden fire tearing through its chest. The beast shrieked and fell, but more took its place. The survivors fought fiercely, blades flashing, voices shouting in their alien tongue. Daniel cut through one beast, then another, the sword humming louder with each strike. But the Watchers moved in endless waves, pouring down the cliffs like a living tide. One survivor was dragged screaming into the rocks, another crushed beneath claws. The group shrank, their courage burning into desperation. Daniel knew they could not hold the eye, pass forever. The sword pulsed in his hand, the glow brighter now, almost blinding. For a moment he felt the same surge of power that had saved him before, but this time it was different. The blade seemed to call to the mountains themselves. He raised it high, shouting with every breath in his lungs. Golden fire burst outward in a wave that swept across the rocks. The ground shook, the cliffs split, and the Watchers were thrown back in burning pieces. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of flames. The survivors stared in awe. Some dropped to their knees, others whispered words Daniel could not understand. He stood in the center, chest heaving, the sword blazing in his grip. He had not just fought the Watchers, he had destroyed them with power no one else could summon. When the fire faded, only a handful of survivors remained. Their faces were scarred, their armor torn, but their eyes no longer held doubt. The metallic-eyed woman who had once spat at him approached, her voice steady. "The sword did not just choose you. It answers to you. That makes you more than a man. That makes you our leader." Daniel shook his head. "I'm no leader, I'm just trying to survive." She stepped closer, her gaze hard. "Survival is leadership when others are willing to follow, and we will follow." The group climbed higher into the mountains, leaving the ashes of the battle behind. Ahead, carved into the cliffs, Daniel saw the faint outline of a colossal doorway. Symbols glowed faintly on the stone, the same as those etched into his blade. The tomb of the fallen warrior was close. The mountains swallowed the group as they climbed higher. Black stone rose around them, jagged cliffs casting deep shadows over the narrow path. The survivors moved in silence, still shaken from the battle with the Watchers. Daniel walked at the front, the golden sword glowing faintly, its light bouncing across the walls like a torch guiding them forward. At last they reached the doorway carved into the cliffs. It towered above them, covered in alien symbols that pulsed as the sword drew near. Daniel could feel something behind it, a weight, heavy and alive, pressing against his chest. The others hesitated, whispering to each other, but Daniel stepped forward. The blade glowed brighter, and the runes across the door lit one by one. With a deep rumble, the stone cracked open, and the tomb revealed itself. Inside was silence. The air was cold, untouched for centuries. Stone statues lined the walls, warriors frozen in eternal guard. Their faces were carved with pain and pride, their weapons raised as if still fighting battles long ended. Torches lit on their own as Daniel entered, golden fire flickering to life as if the tomb itself recognized the sword. They walked deeper until the chamber widened into a great hall. At the center stood a massive stone sarcophagus, its surface covered with carvings of battles and victories. On the lid lay the figure of a warrior, hands crossed over his chest, the same sword Daniel now carried carved in stone above him. The survivors fell silent. Some bowed their heads, others whispered prayers. Daniel approached slowly, his footsteps echoing. He touched the cold stone lid, and the blade in his hand pulsed. Words carved into the sarcophagus flared with golden light. The sword whispered in his mind, and the meaning filled his thoughts. Here lies the warrior who bore the enemies of the galaxy. He fought, and he fell. His curse remains for the one who follows. Daniel felt a chill. This was no ordinary tomb. It was a warning. The metallic-eyed woman stepped forward. He was a savior once. He united armies, crushed empires, and drove back the beasts. But power has a price. The more he fought, the more enemies rose against him. In the end, even his allies abandoned him. Another survivor added bitterly, "Some say he trusted the wrong people. That betrayal killed him more than any enemy blade." Daniel's hand tightened on the sword. Betrayal. It echoed in his mind like a shadow. If it had happened once, could it happen again? As they studied the carvings, the ground trembled, dust fell from the ceiling, and a low growl filled the air. The torches flickered, their flames bending toward the entrance of the hall. Daniel turned, his instincts sharp. From the shadows came the sound of marching. Heavy boots, claws scraping, metal grinding. The alien commander stepped into the light, his skull-shaped helmet glowing with burning eyes. Behind him, soldiers spread out, their weapons humming. The commander's voice cut through the chamber. "So it is true. The human has taken the sword." His gaze locked on Daniel. "Then the curse is his. The enemies of the fallen are now his alone." The survivors tensed, weapons raised. Daniel felt their eyes turn to him. Some were afraid, others ready to fight. But he knew this was no ordinary battle. This was a reckoning. The enemy commander had tracked him across the desert, through the ruins, and now into the tomb itself. Daniel stepped forward, the sword blazing, with golden fire. "If you wanted me, you should have stayed in the shadows, but you came here. Now you'll face me." The commander's burning eyes narrowed. He raised a massive blade of his own, black and jagged, a weapon forged for destruction. "Then we end this, human. Here in the tomb of the warrior you dare to follow." The chamber shook as both armies prepared to clash, the dead warrior's shadow looming over them all. The tomb trembled under the weight of war. Daniel stood at the center, golden sword burning in his hand, while the alien commander's black blade pulsed with dark fire. Around them, soldiers clashed in a storm of steel and screams. The survivors fought desperately, holding the line as the enemy surged forward. But everyone knew the true battle lay between the two men. The commander moved first. His strike was a blur of black fire, heavy enough to crack stone. Daniel barely blocked, the golden blade shuddering in his grip. Sparks exploded and the impact forced him back across the hall. The commander advanced, each blow faster, harder, like thunder hammering down. Daniel's arms ached, his body already weary from every fight before this one. Yet the sword refused to let him fall. Each time he faltered, its fire pushed him forward, guiding his hands, keeping him alive. The clash shook the tomb. Golden and black flames collided, ripping through statues, shattering walls. Dust filled the air and the sarcophagus of the fallen warrior trembled as though the dead himself was watching. Daniel gritted his teeth. "You want the sword? Then take it from me." The commander's burning eyes narrowed. "It does not belong to you. You are no warrior, no king, you are nothing but a thief." Daniel roared and swung, the golden blade carving a path through the black fire. The commander staggered for the first time, his armor cracked, but he did not fall. He laughed, a low, cruel sound. "The sword cannot save you. It cursed the one before you, and it will curse you too. You will fall as he fell." The words cut deeper than the blade. Daniel remembered the carvings, the whispers of betrayal. He saw the warrior who had stood alone, abandoned by allies, crushed under the weight of enemies. Was that his fate too? No. He gripped the sword tighter, forcing himself to stand tall. "I'm not him. I don't fight alone." As if answering his words, the survivors rallied. The metallic-eyed woman struck down an enemy soldier and shouted his name. Others rose beside her, forming a wall of steel around him. Their voices echoed through the hall, not in fear, but in defiance. They believed in him, not the curse, not the prophecy, but in the man who refused to break. Strength surged through Daniel, not from the sword this time, but from the people who had chosen to stand with him. He raised the blade high, and its golden fire blazed brighter than ever, filling the hall with light. The commander charged one last time, his black blade cutting through the flames. Daniel met him head-on. The clash shook the tomb, fire and shadow colliding in a storm of destruction. For a moment it felt as though the world itself would break apart. Then Daniel drove the sword forward, piercing through armor, through shadow, through the heart of his enemy. The commander froze, his burning eyes wide with disbelief. Black fire poured from the wound, swallowed by the golden light. With a final roar he fell, his blade shattering into pieces. The hall fell silent. The enemy soldiers, seeing their leader defeated, broke and fled into the shadows. The survivors cheered, their voices rising like thunder. Daniel stood over the fallen commander, the golden sword dimming in his hand. He was breathing hard, his body battered and bleeding, but he was still standing. He looked at the sarcophagus of the fallen warrior. The carvings of betrayal, of loneliness, no longer seemed like warnings for him. He was not destined to fight alone. The curse could end here, not by the sword's fire, but by those who chose to stand with him. The metallic-eyed woman approached, her face fierce and proud. "You are not the fallen warrior," she said. "You are something else. Something new. The sword did not just choose you. We choose you." Daniel lowered the blade, its glow fading into quiet embers. For the first time, he felt its weight lighten. He was not just a man with a weapon. He was the bearer of a future built not on curses but on unity. He turned toward the survivors, his voice steady despite the exhaustion. "Then let's finish what he started. Not alone this time. Together." The tomb grew quiet once more, but the fire in their hearts burned brighter than ever. The enemies of the fallen warrior were still out there, countless and merciless. Yet now they would face not one man, but many. And for the first time, Daniel believed they could win.